Welcome to the latest word on Black News with Brittany Jones, bringing you powerful conversations.
Black history is American history. American history is Black history. You don't study the history of America like history is a public relations exercise.
Exclusive stories.
That Black women in slavery, it's kind of like our bodies have never been our own. So you start to hear these stories, and these were stories about young women. They were not adults that was brutally raped.
Thought-provoking topics.
Who's the voice of Black America right now? And it feels more like a choir than a preacher. And it's a choir that's singing on different notes, not a choir that's singing in harmony.
And transformative perspectives.
I have learned so much about myself.
Haven't we all?
That inform, inspire, and ignite change. You're watching the latest word on Black News.
And welcome back to the latest word on Black News. I'm your host, Brittany Jones. Always good to be back here with you folks. Well, we've got an update. R&B singer R.Kelly is back in the headlines after a judge denied his request for an emergency release from prison. Now, Kelly's legal team is alleging that prison officials and another inmate were involved in a murder for hire plot against him. The 58-year-old Grammy Award-winning artist is serving 30 years in federal prison for racketeering and sex trafficking. Legal analyst and professor of law, Dr. Laura McNeal, joins us now to discuss the case. Dr. Laura, it's so good to have you back here with us. It's feeling like old times, girl. Welcome to the latest word.
I know that's right. I'm happy to be on. Thanks, Brittany.
Yes, thank you for being here. So, Dr. Laura, we are talking about obviously a huge, huge case, a very disturbing case, that is. We've all been following what's been happening, obviously with R. Kelly, obviously with Diddy. But what can you tell us about this alleged murder for hire plot?
Yeah, okay, this is what really makes me kind of wild out about this case. Okay, we have heard for years about brothers being treated, or rather mistreated, in our prison system. We know what's happening, the research is out there, but to see a celebrity, it really, I mean, I'm sorry about what's going on, but it's important for the public to remember that we need prison reform. You know, this kind of stuff should never happen. And so the alleged murder plot that R. Kelly's attorney is saying is that they're intentionally holding back his medicine that he needs to prevent blood clots, which is how he ended up with multiple blood clots again in his legs, allegedly. That they are giving him more doses than he needs of his anxiety meds, trying to make him overdose, which he almost did, based on recent reports. And so this is very disturbing. Like, you are already in a situation where you have no control over who feeds you, you know, your movement, and then to have people allegedly intentionally trying to take you out. If I were R. Kelly's family members, I would be concerned.
Yeah, you made a great point there, because even talking to just people about this case, right, regardless of what he's convicted for, we know that there are people obviously who are very much like, hey, we're the victims of what he calls us. But no one deserves to be treated in this way, regardless of what you have done. And so just taking a look at this, you know, Kelly's legal team is actually asking President Trump for a pardon. Can the president legally pardon R. Kelly for his federal convictions? And what message would that send about pardoning people convicted of similar offenses?
Yeah, so one thing about the US Constitution that is not up for debate, meaning legal scholars cannot even question this, and I tell my law students, is that absolutely presidents have pardon power, but the only limitation is it can only apply to federal convictions. And so in this case, R. Kelly has been convicted of federal crimes, and absolutely President Trump can pardon him. This is where it gets a little dicey, right? And so if that happens, and again, we don't know what President Trump is going to do, but that's going to send a very unpopular message to victims, especially people that have been victims of sexual violence, sexual assault, that this type of behavior is okay. Because basically in this situation, a pardon would be a get out of jail card for someone that has been convicted by a jury or their peers of sexual violence. And so, you know, I hope that President Trump will really think carefully about if this is a good use of the presidential pardon power, because traditionally, Brittany, it's really meant for people that have been wrongfully convicted or people that have been given excessive sentences. You know, you maybe got 10 years for having a dime bag of marijuana when really it should have been, you know, a little fine. And so it's really supposed to be in situations like that. And so this would be unprecedented for the president of the United States to do a pardon like this. But I mean, time will tell. We'll have to see what happens.
And it really takes me back to a time when you and I were on the desk together at a previous network and the insurrection happened. And so you think about when President Trump got in office and the insurrectionists were basically given pardons. And so looking at that, that was probably rather unprecedented, right? So how would this even compare to that?
Actually, I find it to be on the same level. You have
Mhm.
insurrectionists that have been, again, not alleged, found guilty of committing crimes. I mean, crimes like somebody lost their life, right? And so the police officers that were there protecting the Capitol. So to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to look the other way and turn a blind eye at the fact that you committed crimes and were convicted, same thing. But I think what makes the R. Kelly one a little bit more sensitive is when you're dealing with sexual violence, because anytime you're
Mm,
dealing with a type of sex crime that someone has been convicted of, it's there's a certain power dynamics that come into play, especially when you have
yeah.
vulnerable victims. And so I think that is going to touch a lot, that's going to be a lot more disturbing to people than the pardoning of the insurrectionists, because unfortunately in our country, especially in the Black community, we have a lot of victims of sexual violence and exploitation.
Yeah, very, very valid point there. So let's talk about, Kelly actually is alleging prison officials discharged him from the hospital against medical advice. When an incarcerated person needs ongoing medical treatment, do correctional authorities have the legal right to override hospital recommendations? And what constitutional protections exist for prisoners' medical care?
Okay, Brittany, I'm gonna keep it real with you. I really hope that these allegations are not true. Because if they
Mm,
are, these prison guards, I mean, you talk about wilding out, like this would be wilding out. This is absolutely, if true, a violation of R. Kelly's constitutional rights. The Eighth Amendment of the Constitution is very clear. You cannot subject a prisoner. I don't care if you're R. Kelly, if you're my next door neighbor, or my cousin Ray J. Like you
mm,
subject a prisoner to cruel and unusual punishment. And there's actually a test the court uses, and what they look at specifically for medical abuse, because that's what R. Kelly's attorney is alleging. They look at first, is there a serious medical need that exists? Yes, if you have blood clots, which will kill you,
yeah.
and you've also been unconscious and almost overdosed, and your doctors are telling you you need to stay in the hospital, you're not well enough to leave, that's going to be a serious medical issue. And the second thing that the courts will look at is whether or not a prison official is aware of the medical advice and then basically didn't care. And what we're hearing, again, these are allegations, is that they ignored the hospital's advice, the doctors, the physicians, the experts, saying that he's not ready to leave and letting him leave the hospital with the clots unresolved. And so that, if true, is an absolute violation of R. Kelly's Eighth Amendment rights. And it's also putting the prison system that is holding R. Kelly potentially. Another charge would be negligence. They have a duty to protect him, to treat, to keep him safe. They breach that duty by removing him from the hospital too soon. And as a result, if a harm occurs, which his life is in danger, there's a very strong claim for negligence as well. So this is unacceptable behavior. I hope that it's not true, but if it is true, there will be legal consequences.
So it could be basically civil and criminal offenses at this point.
Absolutely. And that's why, Brittany, I've been telling you for years
Yeah.
on the anchor desk, you need to go to law school, girl. Yes, you're right. That's absolutely correct.
Wow, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, because it's just people kind of hear these things and they don't necessarily know how to kind of understand what this is. And so I think you laying it out that way makes people understand that, those who are responsible could potentially get jail time themselves for doing this, if this is the case.
Absolutely. And the civil, which they're going to have to come out of the pocket as well and pay damages.
Okay, so how about switching gears a little bit to the Diddy case? That's another high-profile case of a music mogul, Sean Combs, who's on trial for racketeering and sex trafficking, a lot of the same charges, right? And so Diddy's former personal assistant, Brendan Paul, received immunity in exchange for his testimony. Do you think this will hurt his credibility rather, with the jury?
Yes, I mean, anytime you're a jury member, just imagine if you and I are sitting on the jury and
Yeah.
we know that the person testifying got a deal, an immunity deal. They're not going to press criminal charges against him in exchange for his testimony. any juror is always going to kind of give the side eye and say, are they telling the truth? Or are they saying what they need to say to get the immunity deal? And so I think it's risky anytime a prosecutor decides to put forth a witness that has an immunity deal, because you run the risk of the jury not believing him. And so I do think, though, this particular witness, I think he did a pretty good job of looking balanced. I mean, in one sense, he acknowledged purchasing drugs for Diddy. He acknowledged helping to arrange some of the freak offs, but he also acknowledged that, in his opinion, that Diddy's former girlfriend, that's referred to as Jane, that Jane's participation in these freak offs, based on his perception or interpretation, were consensual. And so he did say things that would hurt Diddy's case, but also things that would help Diddy's case. And I think for a jury member, that might play into whether or not they believe him, to be quite honest, his testimony, and how much weight they give to it.
And so looking at like even both of these cases, because we talk about like witnesses, and when it's these high profile cases as like R. Kelly, as we've been talking about, and then Diddy, what happens to witness safety if Diddy, for instance, is acquitted or receives a presidential pardon?
So, it's funny when you say what happens to witness safety, the first thing that comes to mind is one of the most compelling testimonies from the trial,
Yeah.
which is, and I think his name was Kid Capri, testified that he believes that Diddy blew his car up.